Hello and welcome to Textile Treasures, an exhibition showcasing bed covers and contemporary textile art from the Norwich Museum Costume and Textile Collections. This exhibition celebrates creativity and craft, highlighting personal narratives told through textiles which have been made to provide comfort, care, and as a medium for self-expression. These treasures are a celebration of the tactile, sensory nature of fabric and its potential. They articulate inventive approaches to the materials available to the creator, whether purchased specifically at great cost or recycled from salvaged remnants. Bed covers and quilts are familiar domestic textiles. They represent home and comfort. Many of the textiles displayed here are collaborative, the makers working alongside each other to fulfill a common aim, to bond with each other, provide comfort, or to document an important time in the makers' lives. Textiles take time to make. There are hours, months, and sometimes years of labour in these objects. We appreciate the skills used and their significance to the makers and owners. Quilts and bed covers are frequently made as gifts and passed down as heirlooms within families, retaining and reiterating the care and attention that went into their creation through successive generations. Each one of these objects is a treasure in its own right. They all have their own individual stories, but when brought together, they contribute to a wider conversation, much like a patchwork of diverse experiences and voices. All the objects in the exhibition are part of the Costume and Textile Collections of Norwich Museums. This large and significant social history collection consists of over 33,000 objects, dress and accessories, furnishing textiles, needlework, weaving, and the tools used to produce textile, which span over 500 years of history. The collection originated as part of the Domestic Life Museum in Strangers' Hall, still a thriving museum in the city centre. The ethos for collecting textiles was to provide an insight into how people lived through the clothing they wore and the furnishings they had in their homes. The Costume and Textile Collection has moved locations a couple of times, firstly to the Curator House Costume and Textile Study Centre and most recently relocating to the Norwich Castle Study Centre. This patchwork panel is part of a set of bed hangings made by Margaretta Brereton of Brinton Hall in Norfolk. It is a tester, which is the name given to a ceiling panel found in a four-poster bed. It's a stunning example of English pieced patchwork with the design of rosettes made of hexagons. Plain linen hexagons surround the densely patterned rosettes to highlight the design and provide contrast. The fabrics are expensive and highly fashionable glazed cotton chintzes designed for use in furnishings. Some of the fabrics were specifically made for cutting into hexagons to use in patchwork, showing how fashionable patchwork was as a pastime. The original colours were vibrant and bright. You can still see the evidence of this in the top corners of the panel, which were protected from light damage. But it is not just the provenance of the fabrics, the applied art of the design, or the considerable skill of the maker that makes this textile extraordinary. The bed hangings and other associated domestic objects were donated to the Strangers' Hall collections in the late 1920s by Margaretta's descendants, along with the personal biographical context that accompanied their creation. Margaretta made these hangings during a period of overwhelming depression following her teenage son John's death in 1800. In the years following her marriage, from 1781 to 1797, Margaretta gave birth to 10 children, 4 of whom died at birth or shortly afterwards. These tragic bereavements were compounded by John's sudden death, and Margaretta was so stricken with grief that she withdrew from the world. The local parish priest records that the grief near brought her body to the dust, and that tears were her meat, night and day. After a year, Anna started piecing together fabric and began her extraordinary creative act. Her friends and family brought new, enticing fabrics to encourage this therapeutic activity. According to family history, it took 4 years to complete the full set of bed hangings, including valances, curtains, headcloth, and the bed cover. The vibrant patterned fabrics are alive with images of flowers, birds, and insects, but only this tester panel includes textiles printed with pictures of human figures. At the centre of 4 of the main rosettes are 4 children at play, poignantly only visible to Anna and her husband John, lying in this most intimate of spaces. By contrast, our next textile marks another rite of passage, but still with marriage as its backdrop. The Bellamy quilt was made in Great Yarmouth by Charlotte Alice Springle and Herbert Bellamy during the year of their engagement from 1890 to 91. It was gifted to the museum collections in 1980 by Gladys Castle and her sister Nora Bellamy, Charlotte and Herbert's 2 daughters. It is an example of a scrapbook quilt, reflecting the influence of printed paper ephemera such as advertising and cartoons. The style is typical of the Victorian period with its intense saturated colours, the shiny textures of silk and velvet, and the occasional bead or metal sequin to add to the visual feast. Each panel's yellow background is filled in with floss silk embroidery, the radiating lines of stitch rippling out from each motif. The subject matter is a dizzying mixture of popular culture references, local sites, everyday domestic items, and personal references, the kind of in-jokes that we as outsiders might never fully understand. During 1891, Herbert lived a short walk from Charlotte's family home, and family history relates that the couple spent their evenings working on their shared project. It's easy to imagine the couple cutting out pictures and advertisements from magazines, catalogues and periodicals and presenting them to each other at the start of those evenings. Looking at it is like overhearing a visual conversation. The finished piece shows not only a snapshot of middle-class Victorian life, but also the intimacy of two people laying the foundations of a new life together and looking forward to many more years of joint pursuits and shared jokes. There are very local sights, such as the broad scene and a rotund seal, lots of domestic items like coffee pots, teacups and jugs, which look like they have come straight from the pages of an Army and Navy Stores catalogue. A highly suitable preoccupation for two people planning their first home together. The rather surreal pair of eyes would have been a familiar sight to the Bellamys and their contemporaries. They are a typical Victorian optician's advertisement or shop site. The images are created with pictorial embroidery, like the peacock and daisies or the cartoon character Ali Sloper. These are likely to be Charlotte's work, and then there are velvet applique shapes brought to life with stitch to highlight details. It seems Herbert made many of the applique designs. His name is stitched on the suitcase at the top of the second panel, and just below there is a very realistic-looking kidney. Herbert was a butcher by trade. It looks like the making of the quilts took place during the winter. There are two motifs copied from New Year's greetings cards, a pair of owls sheltering under an umbrella, and a monkey depicted front and back in the last panel. Displayed next to the Bellamy quilt, we have another embroidered bed cover created for an engaged couple. This bed cover was made by a group of female patients in 1961 during occupational therapy sessions at Shenton Hospital, Shrewsbury. Each square was embroidered separately, stitched together, and then gifted to therapist Jenny Pitchford and her husband John as a wedding present. The occupational therapy department was set up in 1959 to provide opportunities for women to leave the psychiatric ward and have the chance to practice traditional hand skills like weaving, basket making, knitting, and plain sewing for making domestic textiles. Therapy aims to introduce life outside the institution, particularly for women who had been in the hospital for many years. It was used as a possible step towards living more independently and to create a space in which to socialise. The bed cover project was initiated in early 1961. During creative sessions, long-term residents spent time with the women who had just been admitted and had recent experience of life outside the hospital. In Jenny's words, conversations provoked memories and magazines, catalogues and photographs stimulated ideas, which, with the art therapist's help, were worked into a design that could be embroidered. The domestic theme of setting up a house helped the women to think about life outside the hospital in preparation for rejoining families and going home. Jenny and John used this bed cover for decades. It is possible to see the areas where the linen is stretched over the corners of a bed and faded in sunlight. So here, side by side, we have two engaged couples, 70 years apart, about to set up home together, from Yarmouth in 1891 to Shrewsbury in 1961. These textiles clearly reflect the contemporary style of their day in the colours, textures and fashionable illustrations. But we can also see many of the same objects on their respective wedding lists, from cutlery and crockery to bellows and artist palettes. The Bellamy quilt is quite small and has a series of rings stitched to the back, indicating that although it takes the form of a bed cover and is quilted with a layer of wadding at the back, it was actually intended to be displayed on a wall rather than on a bed. The form of a bed cover, but not the function. Which brings us to our next piece. The Duvet of Love by David Shenton, artist, cartoonist and illustrator, uses the familiar form of a bed cover to create an autobiographical panel composed from thousands of button badges, a universally recognisable cultural object that is uniquely placed to express identity and beliefs. The image is built with tiny units or pixels of colour to create a mosaic. The composition and graphic style of the figures reflect David's practice as a cartoonist. The title box in the bottom right-hand corner is composed with political and protest badges documenting the fight for LGBTQ+ rights, including badges from the Gay Liberation Front and early Pride marches. There are badges campaigning for equality and fighting Clause 28, alongside other political causes. This section is outlined with the red ribbon of HIV awareness. David lived in Norwich from 1971 to 1990 and made the duvet of love after he had moved to London. It was a commemorative and comforting act, a memorial to his time in the city and two of his Norwich friends who had died of HIV, Martin and Nicholas. David said of this work, "It was a sad thing to do, but healing. I decided to construct this piece to be as happy and optimistic as I could. The combination of silly and serious badges helped to make this happen. The making of it was the therapy." The duvet of love celebrates love and life, humour and fun, just as much as it commemorates loss. It connects with the Bellamy quilt as an expression of joy and love, and it echoes the Brereton patchwork as a creative and therapeutic memorial. In addition to their shared expression of common experiences and emotions, these textiles all have something else in common, despite their diversity of technique: paper. Most of the badges on the duvet of love are paper wrapped around the badge mount and pin, reflecting their of-the-moment production. The Bellamys took many of their motifs from printed sources. The women at Shenton Hospital used magazines to develop their designs, and Margaretta would have used paper mounts to stiffen her hexagons, wrapping each piece of fabric around the paper shape, tacking it into place and keeping it there until the hexagons were stitched together. This technique can be seen most clearly in our next piece. This fragment of an unfinished patchwork project was donated along with a larger piece of the same design. Obviously, the maker had a grand Brereton-sized scheme in mind. We have shown this small piece reverse side out to give a glimpse not only into the process of making, but also so that the time capsule captured in the paper mounts can be seen. The paper has already been used and comes from several sources: personal letters, accounts, and even a child's handwriting practice. In the early 19th century, paper was subject to heavy taxation, making it a precious commodity, so we can see examples of cross-writing on letters, where in order to save paper, the writing goes in one direction and then the author turns the page 90 degrees to write across the text. There are postmarks too. The earliest identified is 1829 and the latest is 1842, showing how long they have stayed active in this second part of their life cycle. In the centre of the mounts, it's possible to see several pinpricks showing these had been used before and then the tacking removed so that they could be used again. This particular piece has a poignant reminder of the hand of the maker in the threaded needle which is still attached to the work. The maker just put this piece down, maybe to attend to a child or to a boiling kettle, and didn't pick it up again. These patchworks were donated by the daughter of Frederick Page, who was born in 1838. His mother, Elizabeth Frances, died in 1850 and was buried on the 15th of November. Her name appears in the burial register at Peter Mancroft Church between those of her son Frank and daughter Emma. Patchwork isn't limited to bed covers and domestic furnishings. It has also been used to create stunning fabrics for making into garments. Often, clothing made using patchwork are worn in the comfort of home to give warmth, a bit like a wearable bed cover. And like the bed covers on the walls, our selection of costume includes items made from specifically purchased fabrics, chosen with the end design in mind, and clothing made with recycled textiles. Both this man's dressing gown from the mid-1800s and this blouse from the early 1970s utilise figured silks arranged in rosettes in a technique called fussy cutting, which is the art of selecting and arranging the fabrics in such a way so that the pattern meticulously matches with its neighbour to give the illusion of a continuous piece of textile. There was a fashion for patchwork clothing in the late 1960s and early 1970s, reflecting a widespread revival of Victoriana in fashion, including Victorian home furnishings. The garments made from repurposed materials all date from the Second World War and the period just afterwards, when rationing was still in force and people were being encouraged to take a creative approach to repurposing textiles and refashioning garments to bring them back into wear. A movement which has a modern resonance with contemporary efforts towards sustainability in our wardrobes. That the most environmentally low-impact choice you can make is by using the clothes you already own. Objects on display here include this housecoat made of commercial samples given to the maker by her blanket salesman brother, and a fashionably full post-war skirt with a waistband and hem made of blackout fabric, no longer needed to protect a house from air raids. The social history value of textiles is beautifully articulated by this bed jacket and by the professional practice and legacy of its maker, Pamela Claben. Pamela worked in curatorial roles at Strangers' Hall from 1965 to 74 and continued to be actively involved with the collection for the rest of her life, still volunteering on a weekly basis into her 90s. She was one of the founders of the Costume and Textile Association, which is still an invaluable support to the museum's collection of costume and textiles, including the Textile Treasures exhibition. We have over 130 items donated by Pamela in the collection, many from her own personal wardrobe, enabling us to see a life story through dress objects in keeping with the social history ethos of the collection. Items span her time as a Red Cross nurse during the Second World War, with her uniform, medals, and her identity bracelet worn during active duty. This is bookended by her MBE, bestowed in 1999 for services to museums and conservation. Before the war, Pamela had ambitions to study at the Royal Guild of Needlework. The museum collection has her plain sewing workbooks dating to the early 1930s, which contain samples made while perfecting her needlework skills, including perfectly executed buttonholes, gathers, pleats, and darning. All this attention to detail and meticulous skill is exemplified in this beautiful bed jacket, which was made just after the Second World War when Pamela was working as a hand finisher in a factory making undergarments in the East End of London. She used waste material from the factory floor to create a crazy patchwork whose edges are joined with meticulous herringbone stitch. She mentioned in the accompanying notes that the pale pink silk satin was from a stash of pre-war fabric, which must have felt like such a luxury after years of rationing. It has fashionably pleated sleeves which give the shoulder a gentle puffed volume and a neat Peter Pan collar. The inside is lined with a light and soft cream-coloured woolen baby shawl, purchased second-hand and therefore coupon-free from a stall at Petticoat Lane Market. The way in which the creation story of this garment, made from scraps and repurposed second-hand goods, has been woven into the object biography is a brilliant testament to the value of recording object provenance and to the vital importance of the social history of dress and textiles. The creativity to be found in recycling is articulated by these two bed covers, which visually echo with the blanket housecoat and crazy patchwork bed jacket. This beautiful mosaic patchwork is composed of 900 rectangles of woolen tweeds, salvaged from fabric samples and offcuts, made around 1900. The maker, Mary Martin, was the wife of a tailor, Robert Martin, who ran his tailoring business from their shop in Church Plain on Wales next the sea in Norfolk. After her husband died, Mary took over the business and ran it herself. The small blocks of colour, all in similar muted tones, make a striking abstract composition reminiscent of an artist's colour study. It is quite small and likely to have been an underblanket, serving a double purpose of providing warmth and a thick layer of protection from loose bed springs. This beautiful textile, which looks like an aerial view of patchwork fields, was probably not intended to be seen. Its functionality as a hidden textile might be the reason for its stylistic freedom. Another strikingly modern and abstract bed cover is this linen patchwork, a crazy patchwork design with irregular shapes carefully arranged, joined, and then highlighted with feather-stitched embroidery. This piece dates to the 1920s and was made by Mrs. Scott in Norwich, whose husband was a clicker, who worked in a local shoe factory. Clickers cut out leather shapes using sharp handheld blade and templates made of stiffened board, edged with metal, which made a clicking sound. The letter which accompanied the donation of this bed cover to the museum collection mentions that the shapes were connected to the shoemaking industry. It is possible that the linen pieces were offcuts from the lining fabric used in the high-quality women's shoes Norwich was so famed for producing, or maybe a visual reference to the skilled way in which a clicker had to arrange the templates on a tanned leather hide to minimise wastage, which results in a similar crazy patchwork effect in the tessellation of angular and abstract forms. This simplicity creates an elegant composition by removing the clashing colours and textures of crazy patchwork textiles made by an earlier generation. The feather stitch covering the joins is also a feature of 19th century quilts, where every aspect of the composition is decorated. Here, where it is the only decoration, it makes a feature of the functionality of the scene, highlighting the fact that it is a rejoining. There is a visual echo with the Japanese art of kintsugi, where gold lacquer is used to mend broken pottery, embracing the cracks as an event in the object's life to be celebrated. This quilt was made by two sisters as a gift for their nieces and nephews back home in rural Norfolk while they were working as domestic servants in London. They were both equally skilled but had different approaches to creating their patchwork blocks from the materials available. We will never know which sister preferred to make geometric and symmetrical designs or who responded to the varied remnants with a fluid, crazy patchwork aesthetic. The sisters, Ethel and Sarah, were working as housemaids in Lewisham. They were not living in a domestic residence, but in rooms attached to the department store Cheeseman's on Lewisham High Street. They were part of a community of 55 other employees of the department store, drapers' assistants, apprentices, and practical milliners. Cheeseman's started as specialists in selling remnants and job lots of textiles. The eclectic mixture of fabrics used to make the quilts include fine woolen tweeds for men's suits and overcoats, fragile silk crepe, velvet, half silks for women's dress, and a range of furnishing fabrics from cut velvet to woolen blankets. This beautiful quilt kept their 5 nieces and nephews warm in their shared double bed, a truly loving and comforting gift. Textile Treasures also includes some of the most recent additions to the museum collection, showing the continued relevance of creating textiles as an act of collective testimony and individual self-expression. The Corona quilt is an example of the resilience found in collaborative action and the therapeutic power of sewing in the face of challenging times. It was created by members of the Costume and Textile Association, who are also supporters of the exhibition, as a response to the pandemic. The quilt is made up of individual squares embroidered in isolation and then stitched together. The Corona Quilt project was initiated by the CNTA in the early days of the first national lockdown to record the impact of the pandemic and as a way of uniting members in a common endeavour to maintain connection during a time of isolation. As one Corona quilt maker said, "Many squares together make a quilt." The finished quilt has contributions from 57 individual makers. Each person has their own visual voice, but there is a harmony in the subjects and sentiments depicted. Themes depicted include the restorative power of nature, a deep appreciation for the National Health Service and key workers, the hope of a vaccination, and the striking visual representation of the national response to this collective event. Bright rainbows as seen in windows in the form of children's drawings. As we progress together through this life-changing period, we are constantly adapting to a series of stages towards the new normal. Already the experiences of the first lockdown, like the reduction in traffic noise enabling birdsong to be heard, are a memory. The Corona quilt is a creative response and a way of processing these events, which enable the viewer to reflect on the impact on their own lives and in our communities. A true textile testimony, which, thanks to the donation of the Corona quilt to the museum, will be kept in a public collection as a record of these extraordinary times. These squares were made by members of a Norwich-based charity, English Plus, during the 2020 lockdown as part of Norwich Museum's ongoing work with the group. Members were asked to create embroideries connected to the theme of home in response to the bed cover made for Jenny and John Pitchford. English Plus are a charity offering friendship and community alongside lessons in English and practical support for people who have recently moved to Norwich. By working closely with the museums in Norwich, the groups are able to discover and understand more about the history, heritage and culture of their city and identify where they fit into the story of Norwich. When the museums closed due to the lockdown and the group could not meet in person, museum volunteers put together sewing kits which were sent to members of the group so that they could make their squares at home, reflecting on either their home country or their new home in Norwich. The stunning results of this work have become part of the museum's permanent collection, capturing these reflections and voices as part of the fabric of this fine city. Which brings us to the end of the exhibition. The final work is this quilt made by Red Cross volunteers in Canada for a family in need in the UK during the Second World War. Tens of thousands of similar quilts were stitched for people who had lost their homes and possessions as a result of devastating air raids. The brightly coloured, plain and printed cottons, including novelty designs of dogs, create a cheery and homely feel at odds with the bleak reality of civilian life in wartime. This gift of time and textiles is an act of empathy, bringing the comfort of home to those who needed it most. The warm layers held together with tied threads, offering some security in difficult times.